For all of those of you who are just joining us, hello and welcome. Today we have two moderators, Ruka Jasnawu representing Takeem and myself, John Matthey, representing the IVC. Today we have an excellent presentation for you today, delivered by one of the profession's most respected marine appraisers, Mr. Norm Laskay. For all attendees on the webinar today, we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, please be aware that we will have a question and answer time at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to just introduce our presenter for today, Norm Laskay. Norm is based in Louisiana in the USA and is of counsel to DLS Marine Survey and Appraisal. Norm has been involved in many aspects of the profession for many decades and will be sharing his expertise on the upcoming changes and prospective papers relating to the foundations of marine appraisal. To that end, I would like to invite Mr. Norm Laskay to start his presentation. Norm, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am pleased that so many people are interested in this little niche market, although it's international and very important to commerce. We will be going and covering the steps that we do in appraisal of marine assets. And IVC has asked me to do this. Unfortunately, I can't be in Riyadh this year, and I am going to miss meeting some of my good friends that I have met over the years. And also, there are several very, very good presentations that are coming up that I'm sorry I'm going to miss. So let us start. The steps in marine asset appraisal are the same as in other tangible assets. We have the three approaches to value: cost, depreciated, replacing cost new, we have price of the market, and we have income. And towards the end, we will get into some of the oddities and unusual situations in this international market that makes the first three, it takes some work to get the first three to work together. And when I give presentations, I usually ask for questions as we go along, but in this case, please make notes on your questions and we will try to get them at the end. If for some reason we run out of time and can't get to your question, please contact me direct. I have done this with all my classes, all my teaching. If you have questions, I am here to try to answer your questions and improve all of our skills, because I learn things from you as the questions come in. The cost approach. Comparables is a challenge that there are such a variety in design, sizes of vessels. And although all tankers carry liquid cargo, they are not all of the same or even similar utility. I was asked to do a desktop in-office appraisal on a orange juice tanker. And while I know a lot about ships, I had never done anything about with the carrying of orange juice. But you still have to do all the scopes of work to understand the ship you are dealing with. So I had to learn about how orange juice is transported, which is basically as concentrate or a natural liquid, what type of tanks it's in, what are the loading ports, what are they like, what are the discharge ports, what are the cargo routes, how many ships carry orange juice, and how many of those match the comparable that I was trying to value. And that is how important choosing the correct, understanding the correct vessel is. In one of my first presentations in Beijing in 2011, an entire hour was on identifying vessels. Our journal here in the office, where we collect data on sales and new construction costs, we have 33 different categories. Our database of appraisals that we have performed over the last 30 years has 51 categories. The organization that a lot of us use for getting information, Clarkson's, their database has 12 large headings, but under each heading, large heading, they have many smaller subdivisions, some from 10 to 20. So they can have close to 100 different types of vessels. To simplify or give you an example, under chemical tankers, there are subgroups of chemical bulk tankers, which just carry one cargo, and chemical parcel tankers, which carry numerous or various parcels of different liquids. Then they are subdivided by their capacity, which is dead weight tonnage, DWT. That is the weight of cargo that ships carry, and is generally DWT is considered to be the payload of ships. And you see that we have the categories here, the various size vessels, and they are in 10,000 deadweight increments. Some of that is, you can find some lists that vary slightly, but in general, the breakdowns are by groups of deadweight. And you have parcel tankers are also have subdivisions as long range, signified as LR, or medium range as MR. And those terms can be appended by the numbers 1 or 2. So you can have an LR1 or an LR2, or an MR1 or an MR2. So you can see that having the correct knowledge of the type vessel that you are valuing and being able to go and find comparables that are similar. This photograph is of a parcel tanker, and the difference between parcel tankers and bulk tankers, just from the visual side, is that you will see here in the middle of the ship, on regular tankers, you will have 1 or 2 different manifolds or pipes where the cargo can be loaded on board and then at a discharge port pumped off to the shore. So that's 2 pipes. On a parcel tanker, in this case, you have 10 pipes, 10 different manifolds, which indicates that this vessel can carry 10 separate types of cargo. And underneath, they will be, you can see some lettering just underneath there that can be the numbers 1 to 10 or the alphabet, so that when a vessel comes into port, everyone knows that cargo A is going to be loaded into pipe A, and that's where the hookup is. And the parcel tanker can have 10, in this case, if you have 10 manifolds, you can have 10 different cargoes. The cargo tanks can be all different because of the chemicals they carry. Some have to have very special coatings. Some have to have stainless steel tanks. The pumps that each one of these cargo tanks may have to have special type impellers in the pump and special type seals, because the chemical that is being carried in that tank may eat certain types of coating or may destroy certain types of seals. So the parcel tankers can get very intricate. Another big subheading, much larger than chemical tankers, are bulk carriers, and they're the ones that carry all the things: cement, grain, coal, and ore. And they have names which correspond to their deadweight ranges. You have the Capesize, very large, and the Capesize regular. They're called Capesize because they do not fit through any of the canals of Panama, Suez. They have to go down around the tip of Africa and the tip of South America, which is going around the Capes. So they have the name Capesize. Panamax, that's the biggest vessel that can fit through the Panama Canal. There is another type called the Neo-Panamax, and that is the one that can fit through the new locks at the Panama Canal. A slightly odd one is Kamarax. That also is of a size that fits through the Panama Canal, but it got its name that it is the largest bulk carrier that can fit into the port of Kamsar in Western Africa, which is a major bauxite port. Then the three smaller ones are Handymax, Supramax, and Handysize. They are all of the smaller type bulk carriers, which are used to carry not just a smaller amount of whatever the cargo is, but also they are going to probably trade with the smaller ports. You also find that there are geared and ungeared ships, which mean a geared ship has cranes on it. A geared bulk carrier has cranes on it so that it can unload or load itself. Ungeared ships have to be loaded or unloaded by a shore facility. And the tonnage ranges, I've said, vary, such as I've seen Handymax cover much wider range than that other list is, but they are an approximation of size, and they are almost like nicknames, or more accurately, the type intended service. So again, it's very important to know the asset that you are talking about. Up here on the right, you see a geared bulk carrier. The gear is, it has these 4 cranes, so it can unload and load itself. You have 4 cranes and 4 hatches. These cranes can spin 360 degrees, so they can work, this one can work either one of these hatches, or these 2 can work this hatch in unison, but it is self-sufficient. Down here is a ungeared. As you can see, there is nothing on deck. Whatever facility it has to use, wherever it's going to load or unload cargo, it has to use a shore facility. Here is another photograph. You can see an ungeared there. This is at a grain elevator in New Orleans, where it is loading from this yellow on top of the hatch covers. Had been loading corn. But behind it, you can see a geared that's also loaded the elevators. They have the cranes out over the river, so that it doesn't interfere with the grain elevator. This vessel needs shore assistant. This type vessel can use shore assistant or self-sufficient. So they're operating in two different markets. And in the foreground, these are typical harbor tugs, harbor and probably near coastal, usually probably 3,000, 4,000 horsepower tugs. And you're going to have the same problem when you look for comparables when you're doing the market approach. When you're looking for comparables, you're still going to have to know the exact type vessel that you are using for comparison's sake. Tons are not always tons. When we value a vessel, we value it by its payload, which is the weight of the cargo carried. But you will see in documentation and in usually mostly just in documentation, that a ship will be given by its gross tons or net tons. These tons have nothing to do with weight. They are a measurement of volume and are used for regulatory and taxing purposes. Back in the early days, people were moving cargo on water. And of course, the authorities said, look, these people are making money moving cargo. How can we get some of this? Well, we will apply taxes. So the port authority or the country, and often in those days, a port was also a city-state, would apply a tax. And the tax was, since the vessels then were basically just big empty boxes with a pointed end, the amount of cargo they could carry was the volume, the cubic area within the vessel. So the taxes were based on the cubic area, and that has been carried on in the United States and other places. In the United States, a ton of cargo area is 100 cubic feet. The other point about this, it doesn't exactly relate to values, but it should be known that a lot of regulations are set up based on gross tonnage. For instance, in the United States, if you have that 500 gross tons is a step in regulation. So if you have a vessel of 499 gross tons, you may only have to carry a crew of maybe 5 or 6 and have certain safety equipment. As soon as the ship is 500 gross tons, you may have to carry 2 or 3 extra crew members and additional safety equipment to go with it. So tonnage is indirectly connected with value, but for the appraiser, that's generally not. It is of some side interest, but for most appraisals, it is not something that we are really concerned about. But you see this number all the time, gross and net tons, but it is not directly related to value. So replacement cost new is about size and complexity of construction. The bigger the vessel and the more complex it is, the higher the cost is. These are just some very general ranges that I put down. They can vary, but this slide gives you an idea about the range of values that you can be dealing with at least blue water ocean-going vessels. The smaller bulk carriers and tankers can be in the $20 to $30 million range. The much smaller, that can be like maybe 80 meter, 70, 80 meter vessels in the oil field service can still cost, because they're highly technical, can still cost 30 to $40 million US dollars. And that's construction in Europe. Some of these construction in China, that the numbers will be a little bit lower, but also some of the vessels that are used in oil field service in Asia may not be quite as complex. The very large crude carriers, VLCCs, can be over $120 million. The big cruise ships that you can see, that we see all the time in advertisements around, they can be $300 million and up. Something much, much smaller, again, about the same size as an ocean service vessel, 70, 80 meters, but they are so intricate and they are like five-star hotels. Instead of a cost of 30 or 40 million, because of how they're put together, they can be 100 to $200 million. Large wind farm construction vessels, which we're starting to see, most of them are much less than that, but one that is being built for European service, which is a very highly technical, very large foundation laying and wind farm construction vessel, has a reported cost of just over $300 million. And scrap values on ocean ships is generally in the $3 to $5 million range currently. Now, if we have our replacement cost new, our next step is understanding what is the residual or the terminal value, the value at the end of its normal economic life. For most ocean-going ships, this is scrap value. How do we know what scrap value is? In a ship's documentation, somewhere, usually in the builder's information or in its stability calculation book, there will be a notation of what the vessel's light ship weight, LSW, is. That is the weight of the ship before it has fuel, stores, anything else. It is the weight of the ship right there as it comes out of the shipyard, the weight of the materials that put it together. Now, you can find sources that give current purchase price in dollars per light ship weight in international scrapping areas. And one of the sources is the Hellenic Shipping News. We will talk a little bit more about that later, but it has sources that list the various areas in the world and what they are paying for scrap. Generally, it was in the range of $300 to $400 per light ship ton. Now, because of the strangeness of the world economy, that has gone up to $400 to sometimes specific vessels $600 per light ship ton. But that will vary by the area that you are in the world. Most of the scrapping is done in the areas around the Indian Ocean, India, and along the west coast of India. However, and also some in China. But the European Union has come out with regulations that says if your ship is a ship operated by a European company with flying a European flag, you have to scrap the ship at a ecologically sound green shipyard or ship scrapping facility. There are very few of those now, and there is a few that are in Scandinavia. I think there's one or two in the UK. They're trying to build some in Europe. The biggest one is now in Turkey. And because scrapping a ship cleanly is a great different than just cutting it apart. The last time I saw, instead of the Indian Ocean price of, let's say, $500 per light ship ton, doing it at the green yard in Turkey, you would only be getting $350 per light ship ton, because the cost to scrap a ship in an ecologically sound way is much more expensive. Now, also for residual or terminal value, a rule of thumb used by some is 10% of replacement cost new. Now, historically, we have seen that this is often very close, but not always. And one of the problems with a rule of thumb is that if you are in court, you may be pushed back at, because it's not a real statistical number that you can say here is a proof, unless you can collect some of this information. And one of the good talks that's going to be given in Riyadh is on the rule of thumb, and that is one that I would like to see. An alternative to this rule of thumb is one that I use frequently, is that when I'm looking for my comparables and seeing all the range of the sales or asking prices, I can see where the bottom of the market is. I may be looking for something that's 10 years old, but in my research, I can see vessels that are for sale that are 20 or 25 years old. And this can indicate the end of life value of the asset you're looking for, and at least gives you a specific number to use as a terminal value when you can't use scrap. What is the normal economic life of a ship? In general, international blue water service, based on a lot of scrapping statistics, they have a design life of 20 to 25 years. And this is designed life. When an owner decides to build a ship, they need to determine the cost of the ship against how long they have to recover the cost of the ship. And they usually have a designed life. Yes, vessels last much longer than that. I surveyed or I appraised a vessel on the Great Lakes in the United States that was a Great Lakes style bulk carrier, self-unloading. It was built in 1903. It was just over 100 years old when I looked at it, and it was still operating and still making money. It was riveted. It had a diesel engine that I've never seen another one like it before, that belonged in a museum, but it was operating and making money. Just a few years ago, that same vessel had the engine room cut off and has been converted into an ATB, an articulated tug barge unit. And that hull, which is now well over 110 years, is still being used. But again, this is a vessel that is operating in very cold, fresh water So it's still, degeneration is not like operating in salt water. Another thing about economic life is the classification status. We will get into the classification a little bit later, but this vessels, ocean-going or inspected vessels, have to be inspected twice every 5 years. That is, they will have an interim or mid-period inspection in their year 2 to 3, and a more major inspection at year 5. And that will be year 5 and year 10, year 15, and year 20. If you were looking at a ship that says, say, is 20 years old, and it has a certificate that is going to, that still has 3 more years on it, we are considering that it is at the end of its normal economic life, because it has a certificate that says it can operate for another 3 years. Its remaining economic life could be 3 years. If its condition is so very good upon your inspection that you think it can make another 5-year circuit, its remaining, even though it is 20 years old, its remaining economic life due to its condition can be 8 years instead of 0 years. Another thing, back on that same subject, I have just one of the blogs I have written that just came out, I think 2 days ago. I have gotten more into a little bit about normal economic life. And I'll say that now, the blogs that I have been writing for about 1.5 years now, although they've been written mostly for finance, people in ship finance, there is a lot of information in it about looking forward and how some of the new regulations are going to affect the life of ships. So remaining life and physical life and economic depreciation, some of the more details are covered in those blogs. Okay, we have the usual forms of depreciation as with other machinery and equipment. Physical depreciation, that is the main one with vessels. You have, if you haven't seen the vessel, and of course with comparables that you have seen, you deal with calendar age. If you can physically inspect the vessel, then you can determine by your own visual inspection its actual physical age. And this can be adjusted by the status of the port state certification, which I just talked about, the classification, that if its certificate says it can operate for another few years, or you believe it can operate another couple cycles, you can adjust its physical age. Economic depreciation, again, the status of its port state certification. Now, port state in the United States, it is the United States Coast Guard. Most, I think all maritime countries have their own maritime overwatch group. I think most of the ones that I certainly know that Australia, Russia, the UK all have groups that are responsible for inspecting vessels of their own flag, and also can inspect vessels from other countries that come into their country. So the status of that certification as to how many years it can operate is important for economic life. Because it's economic life, Even if the vessel is in wonderful shape, it's only 5 years old. If for some reason it doesn't have that certificate, permission to work, it cannot make any money. That's why it falls under economic depreciation. And one that is coming to be a bigger and bigger factor is the status of compliance with current or upcoming regulations. We will get into that further on, but there are so many new regulations coming up that are involved with ecological changes and emission control, that if vessels cannot comply with these new regulations, no matter their condition, they will not be able to operate. On the left is America standard certificate of classification that you can see. It doesn't have, I mean, it's got some basic information, but usually that's not a great deal of stuff that you want to know, or that's necessary for the appraiser. But on the other side, when we're talking about the status of a vessel certification, if you're not on board the vessel and need to find out what how all their certifications stand, you can go to some of these classification societies, and as noted here, you can see in this case, annual hull survey number 1 is due in June of 2022. And there are a number of different certifications that every vessel has. And you can find these at some of the classification sites. And there is a list at the end of the ones where you can. Otherwise, you may have to ask the ship owner for a list of their documentation and when they expire. This is a certificate of inspection. This is from the Coast Guard. This is given to all inspected American vessels. Other countries have something very, very similar. This is also a good time to mention we have here an official number. While ships have names, it is not unknown that in a 5-year period, a ship can be sold 3 times and have 3 different names and 3 different operators. For identification, a name is not very good. But when a ship is built within a country or for service in the country, that country assigns it with an official number. That official number will stay with that vessel as long as it is still regulated by that country. So if something was built in Germany and is still German when you see it, its German number will still be effective. However, for ships that are in international service, they have to have an IMO number, International Maritime Organization. The IMO is the maritime wing of the United Nations. All countries that belong to the United Nations that have merchant vessels and are of the big enough size, they will have to have an IMO number. And that IMO number will go with that vessel for the rest of its life, no matter what country it belongs to, who's operating, what its name is. So an IMO number is a definite identifier. The other information that you can find in such a certificate is important. Its use, where it can be operated for ocean-going vessels. It usually say for ocean service. Other information off these certificates are very useful. Here we have an expiration date of the certificate. So when you can see the documents, that is, you can gather a great deal of information off of them. Technological depreciation is very difficult to use. It rarely used because the technology in marine vessels hasn't changed greatly up until just recently. And a lot of the technological changes have been forced by regulations. So that falls under economic depreciation. And it's very difficult to monetize because you certainly for your own, for comparables, you know the age of the vessel, the tonnage of the cargo carrying deadweight capacity, maybe a sales price for an acting price, but you know nothing about the details of your comparables. So there's no way to do an exact comparable or monetize the difference in the small differences between vessels. Now into the market approach. Again, we said the same thing. You need to know what your vessel is. A very helpful thing to always keep in mind, the principle of substitution applies very often in marine assets. A party will not pay more for the vessel in question than the cost they would pay for an equivalent vessel with the same purpose. I often say when I'm valuing a vessel, I try to think like a buyer. What vessel would I buy that is going to do the same job as the vessel I am valuing? Clarkson's uses the term peer vessel, which is a good term. This is a vessel of a similar capacity or type, similar range of deadweight capacity, and of similar age. Only needs to be similar range of deadweight and of a similar age. This can usually be 2 or 3 younger or older. So if you're looking for comps for your vessel, you can have a 4 to 6 year spread. The reasons for this lack of exact accuracy is the variations in capacity, whether the comparables have 5,000 more deadweight or 3,000 less deadweight, can be adjusted when you do $1 per deadweight capacity adjustments in your calculations. But the difference in age is not that important because the variations in the life and service of your comparables, such as where they were built, what routes they have run in their life, what type of cargoes have they carried? Has it been nice, clean cargoes? Have it carried salt, which eats ships up? What is the level of maintenance that comparable has had? What capital expenditures have been used? These are all unknown in the normal course of your appraisal procedures. So an age range is accepted as a scope of work. And it's also very common to know where in the world your comparables are or where they were when they were sold. So relocation costs are not a factor when you do marine equipment, because this is an unknown as to where they are, and it's unknown where the buyer is going to take them. This is much more important in small ships, but in ocean-going ships, they can be used anywhere. Smaller ships, no, you're usually working somewhat in your same district, but still relocation costs based on the value of the smaller vessels is not a factor. A brokerage sheet This is a typical sales sheet that you will find under Hellenic Shipbrokers and under their own websites. You can go to some of the websites of various brokers, a little more on that later. But this is normally what you can see. One, this is a sheet for a specific week. So we know the time, general time of the sale. It is for tankers. You know the vessel's name, its deadweight, when it was built, where it was built, the selling price, and the Chinese buyers. The price is, well, it's usually rounded and it's approximate. It's usually pretty close, but it is, again, this is close we're going to get with the sources of information that is generally available. So here's how you can find your comparables with the bigger ships. When you're looking at smaller equipment that is generally used in coastwise in and around your country, finding sales information can be much more difficult. Comparing payload, how much paying cargo can a vessel transport? And you have to be using the same numbers. For the largest group, let's talk about bulk carriers and tankers. They are measured in deadweight capacity, which we have noted, which is tons, T-O-N-N-E-S, which is metric tons. In some countries, it'll be T-O-N, English ton. And with English tons, you can have long or short tons, but don't want to get it. You try to keep everything in the same type tonnage if you can, and if you know it. For liquid carrying vessels, the cargo can be, this is usually for barges and smaller tankers. Instead of deadweight capacity, it'll be the cubic meters or the barrels of liquid capacity. Container ships are measured by TEUs. That was originally stood for trailer equivalency units. But now that these 20-foot containers have often been replaced by 40-foot containers, TEU is now referring to a 20-foot equivalent, and the 40-foots can be applied to as an FEU, 40-foot equivalency unit. Passenger ships are per passenger capacity, which is not simple. You have ferries and day boats. These are vessels where they just give you a seat and a bar and a food kiosk. You can count them as per passenger, but cruise ships and overnight ferries may give passenger capacity and stateroom count. On overnight ferries, some of their passenger carry are seated, some pay extra for rooms. And the numbers may not balance between staterooms and count because of the rule for cruise ships. It's double occupancy of 2 lower beds, and such things as single occupancy and family occupancy is getting more popular on cruise ships. So the exact number can vary a little bit. Ferries that also carry cars may just give you a vehicle number. That is, it can carry X number of cars or X number of mixture of car and trucks. Or something that's much clearer, they will give the number of lane meters. That is the total longitudinal area of parking space in meters. That's much more useful. But all this mixing makes comparing ferries more difficult if one's trying to balance various mixes of passengers and vehicle capacities. Roll-on, roll-off vessels have lane meters or vehicle counts and often multiple decks, but the access way of how you get vehicles on and off are different. You can have side ramps, you can have stern ramps, angled stern ramps. The difference is that if a vessel has side ramps or an angled stern ramp, this allows the ship to tie up at a dock in the normal sideways fashion, and the wheeled vehicles can go off right onto the dock. But if the vessel only has a stern ramp, you need a special dock where the stern only of the ship can fit against the dock. This then changes the marketability of a vessel with an angled stern ramp or side ramps can go to many more docks than one with just the other side ramp. Now here is a photograph of an angled stern ramp. You see the vessel is flat against the dock, but because of the angle in the ramp, equipment can be run off onto the dock. This is a ro-ro with a standard stern ramp. See the stern ramp there? It can only unload when that ramp is against the dock. So it's either sticking at right angles to the dock, or many docks have custom ramps that go out and join the ship so to match up with the ramp of the ship. Tugs and push boats are rated by horsepower. Bigger harbor tugs and ocean-going tugs are listed by BP bollard pull. That is an actual measurement of its actual pulling capacity. The more it can pull, the better, the more it is worth. Then you have harbor and near coastal tugs that do ship docking and escort work. And you have ocean service tugs with larger double drum, sometimes triple drum towing winches, and they're classed for full ocean service. Now, these smaller tugs, inland, harbor near coastal, these can be, currently, they can be 3,000 to 6,000 horsepower. When they're using for escort work, when they're being used for escort work, that is with a large tankers or with large container ships, they can have possibly 8,000 horsepower or more. Ocean service tugs, they can be anything from a couple thousand horsepower to 20,000 horsepower, depending on how big and what service they are in. Inland river push boats, push tugs as they are called in Europe, or tow boats. The terminology is can be used interchangeably in these services. The smaller inland push boats that work around fleets and just push one or two barges in a local area may have 1,000 to 2,000 horsepower. While the bigger boats like work on, like on the European rivers, can be 3,000, 4,000 horsepower. The very large towboats that you may have seen photos of on the Mississippi River that push 40 loaded barges upriver against a strong river current, they have 10,000 horsepower. And of course, their prices match. Now, in doing some of the comparables, you can use trend lines, and I will mention a little more later. And one of the ways is using, of course, Excel. It's putting your data points on a graph and getting a trend line. unfortunately, in my mind, Excel likes to draw a straight line. It is difficult to weight your data points. Not only the difference between a data point with actual sales compared to a data point with asking price, compared to a data point where you are estimating its effective age because your comparable has been rebuilt in its age, but you don't know the extent of the rebuilding. So without weighting the points is difficult. You can do this if you're doing this by hand and various marking and color coding and weighting your different things, but regression analysis is very difficult with marine equipment because you rarely have more than 3 accurate data points on each one of the comparables to be used for weighting it. So and I'll show an example later on. But whatever it is, you are dealing with its capacity on a dollars per deadweight, horsepower, cubic meters, TEU per dollar basis. And I say dollars, but whatever currency you're working in. It is not uncommon when you're looking for comparables that you will see mostly the comparables are given in most sales almost all sales are given in dollars, but asking prices can be given in dollars and euros, Korean currency, Japanese currency, Chinese currency, Singapore dollars. So you have to convert to a common currency that you needed. And there will be times when you cannot find a decent set of comparable peer vessels. And that's when you go look for a similar service vessel of any age located anywhere in the world. So this is when you're setting up your graph, use the same dollars per payload calculation. Then you put them on the graph and starting a trend line from replacement cost new at the other end, scrap value or terminal value. Now, in doing trend lines, it is not unusual that you may find several trend lines if you have enough data points, as there are some differences in market levels between the Pacific, Atlantic, and Mediterranean and some other small areas. Here is an actual Excel graph that was used. You see towboats under 2,000 horsepower. These are very, very common in the United States. They are the small ones I was talking about. They're called fleet boats. They work in a very local area and move barges around and just service within a harbor. In this case, you see the track started way back. There's a whole lot of data, 1970 and 1980, because there were a lot of vessels built at that time. And then it went up to the current date. And you see where the trend line added, and this is where the calculation was made. The problem with the straight line, and particularly this Excel example, is that we see starting about here, all the outlying data points are way above with the trend line. And there's a reason for that. At about this point, new regulations were put into place where all push boats had to be inspected. Therefore, they had to be upgraded. They have to have certain extra safety equipment on. They had to be inspected. Therefore, they cost more money from owners to get them so that they can still continue to work. And all new construction had to have all these new equipment on it also tier 3 and tier 4 engines, so they became much more expensive. So from this point on, with these new regulations, the value of old barges really jumped. So if we started with a graph right here at 2010 to 2020, you can see the trend line would be like this, and your value would be completely different. The level of data you can work with is very greatly. As I noted, I saw the picture of what actual brokerage site, but the sales and purchase sites give you the vessel's name, the year, may give you the vessel's name, or the actual, the sales and purchase sites will give you what you saw. But you will know no other details about the vessel unless you can go take that name and research it. And demolition sites will give you the vessel's name, its light ship deadweight they paid on, and the dollars they paid. Now, brokerage sites that give asking prices will not provide a name, but just a type, a bulk carrier, a tanker. They'll give its deadweight tonnage or maybe length and an asking price and maybe a general location. It's in the Med, it's North Europe, wherever. And they will list, many will just give you a price on request, forcing you to call the broker, who will not give you the answer because they don't want to give away their information. Some ads will occasionally add some details, last dry docking or something else that sounds good for marketing, but that is rare. Smaller vessels may something like repowered in 2015, or on older vessels rebuilt in 1995 and 2010. This leaves you with no idea what the rebuilding entailed as what its effective age is. However, this is the point. All of the vagaries of international vessel valuations are dealt with by all appraisers and should be dealt with in the scope of work declarations and in the use of extraordinary assumptions and hypothetical conditions, such as per USPAP or IVS standards. The supply of information for some shipping sectors is terrible, but all of us are dealing with that same problem. The income approach, it's usually only with an unusual vessel or something in unusual service, where replacement or reproduction cost is not available, or the vessel is operating in a very unusual market. I will add that 99% of the time you're using replacement costs. In some very rare, weird assets, you may have to do reproduction, but that's usually replacement. For doing the income approach, what you want to do is the historic cost of the vessel for 3 years in the past pertaining to fuel, which is the biggest single ongoing cost of vessel ownerships, and the cost of the crew, the cost of maintenance, the cost of stores, that is food and lines and lube oil, things like that, the cost of insurance, and the cost of regulatory compliance. That is how many, what has the shipyard cost been in the past for the 5-year inspections. And you will also want to know the budgeting costs for the same categories for the future 3 to 5 years. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the owner is going to give you honest answers. Most of the time I found they are, but you also have to judge the reasonableness of the numbers they give you. But the problem with the income approach is that the volatility of marine markets by the types and service is so great. This has been true with scrap values have changed greatly, as I noted before. Fuel costs can vary greatly, and we don't know what fuel costs are going to be in the future. So how can you measure the greatest expense on a vessel when you don't even know what it's going to be? And the volatility of markets itself can mean estimating future income can be full of error. And even estimating numbers for a vessel with 10 to 15 years of remaining economic life is, in my mind, impossible. Now, at one time, there was a thing called that was used to measure what is called long-term asset value method of valuation, which basically said the vessel earned so much money in the past on average, we're going to use that same average in the future. In my mind, that is not the best way to go about it. And in my mind, it seems to avoid some of the requirements of the International Valuation Standards, including clearly including the scope that developed the opinion. How was this past average obtained? Explaining the use or non-use of the three approaches to value, they just say, this is the income approach. The assumptions made, again, how did they get to the value, the income of average, and what did they average? And again, what does one use as a discount rate for particular vessels and particular service? So doing such a thing, income approach under the LTAV system is not something that I think is sound, particularly under international valuation standards. Reconciliation, your reconciliation, you can do as you do in any appraisal based on the information you have put into it. Now, I said we're going to cover some quick complications. This is where everything is available, but everything is in flux now with regional and international regulatory bodies. Some of these regulatory changes I spoke about in Auckland in 2019, which is vessels now have to have ballast water treatment systems. In some areas of the world, like in New Zealand, the vessels' hulls have been cleaned within a year so they don't bring different barnacles and other things that are attached to the hull into the country. And of course, the biggest thing, low sulfur fuel to reduce emissions. And we have smaller vessels and not normal scrapping, so the residual value can be difficult to monetize. I said one way to go about it and was either the rule of thumb or the looking at end-of-life values of comparables. Subtype of vessels, dry docks. Dry docks are not propelled. Well, neither are barges, but barges are meant to be moved. Dry docks are not meant to be moved. So if a dry dock in a shipyard is actually a tool and is not generally an income center. So if you are valuing a dry dock, the lender is also usually valuing the shipyard where it will be used. If the shipyard goes bankrupt, the dry dock, well, actually, if it's at a shipyard, if you're doing a fair market value with the dry dock in the shipyard, working shipyard, that is a fair market value. That is a value in place and in use. It's one of the very rare times that such a term is used. However, if that shipyard goes bankrupt, that dry dock is no longer has the same market. It can then be considered order liquidation or forced liquidation, or if you are asked to do order liquidation or forced liquidation, that dry dock has to be moved someplace, and you are thinking about definitely removal costs. And removal costs for a dry dock can be very steep. Then articulated tug barge units are also interesting. We talked about gross tons earlier and how it affects the crewing and other things. A ship may be X gross tons and have to fall under a lot of regulations. If you then cut the ship apart and the cargo portion is a barge, you have lowered some of the gross tonnage and the regulations, but particularly if you take the machinery in with the crew and machinery, you are now reducing the gross tonnage from ship size to possibly under that 499 I mentioned before, or under another threshold. So while a ship might of that size might have to have a crew of 17 to 25 people and fall under all kinds of safety regulations, if you are just dealing with a small tugboat, the crew could have 5 to 10 people in much smaller safety regulations. But the other side of that is I've seen loans where there's one loan for the barge and one loan for the tug. Their highest and best use are together because they were built to be used together. The dimensions are built to be used together. If you sell them separately, under orderly liquidation or forced liquidation, or even fair market value separately, that tugboat value could drop by possibly $1 million because you are going to have to convert the bow of that tug to fit to another barge. And the bow units, the bow construction and pinning system can be $1.5 million. To change the stern of a different barge to fit this specific tug, you can be talking about possibly $500,000 or more. So those penalties I guess they could be called cost to cure technological depreciation if you are separating the two units. Up here, we have a dry dock. Dry docks are valued by the amount of weight they can lift, called lift tons. Also, an important thing is their length. How long of a vessel can they fit on? And the width between wing walls. These are wing walls. The width between wing walls says how wide a vessel can be used. So they fit different markets. Also, the smaller ones are like they are, but larger ship dry docks will have cranes that are integral part on top of the wing walls. So they are a separate set of comparables. And down here, you can see an ATB where this would be normally be a full tanker. But in this case, the forebody is the tank, and this is the power and cruise quarters. They are pinned together with, there's 4 or 5 different types of pinning systems. Some pinning systems are made for like 3 meter or 4 meter seas. Some are much stronger for ocean going units that are made where the pinning unit is the same as being a ship, and they can go through the same storms as a ship could go through. Okay, what we're getting into now is knowing as much as we can about what the vessel is and how it is going to comply with current and near future emissions. What fuel or fuels does it now, or can it burn? Because we're now getting into the area of dual fuel vessels. What are the fuel capacities? That is, what is the vessel's range? This is going to be different if it's operating on LNG or methanol or ammonia. The capacities and range different because of the power contained in the various type fuels. What is the vessel's carbon intensity indicator, CII, or annual efficiency ratio, AER? Ships will be measured as A through E. If you are an A, B, or C, you are pretty good. You are good. If you're below a C, you will be in need of remediation. These regulations are coming into place at the beginning of the year. At the end of this year, they're going to phase in. Every year, the regulation will get tougher. I have written on this, going over this very quickly, but I have written on this in my blogs. And actually, the last one that came out was the one before this covers CII and AER. The last one is more about ages and more about fuel. And then you need to know, have an idea of the cost to cure these economic depreciation parts, because if you cannot come into compliance with these environmental standards, you will lose your documentation. You will not be able to operate the vessel, and it'll become a stranded asset. And the changeover is happening fast. With cars, we know they're providing electricity sites, but you cannot do the same thing, build commercial sites to produce LNG and methanol and ammonia that easily. And even producing green electricity for large electrical powered ships and hybrids is difficult. There are some starter places. Australia is working hard on green electricity and green methanol. But then once you produce the fuel, you have to get distribution systems where the ships can refuel. And also in my last blog, I do talk about that. Therefore, the appraiser has to understand the utility of the vessel and not just the capacity. What can it do? What markets will it be in? I think that some ship brokers will start adding details that will give you more information about this. This information is in Clarkson's. And I think as we go further into the green world, the markets will start showing some differences in values of different levels of compliance. Right now, with fuel being so expensive, even LNG being so expensive, we have found that the ships that use high sulfur fuel oil but have scrubber systems have higher values because they can buy cheap high sulfur fuel and still operate. So they have higher values until the fueling systems are worked out. Some owners do not operate ships to earn money. They operate ships by buying ships at the low end of the market and selling them at the high end of the market. So they're playing with them like stocks. This is a small group, but it's happening. Cabotage in some of you in various countries, this is something you need to know because countries can have regulations that only ships in their country, owned by their owners in the country, flying their country's flag, can carry cargo from one point to another in their country. This creates a two-tier market where vessels within your country have higher value to users within the country because they can be used in more trade. So that is fair market value, and it's one of the rare cases where you find highest and best use is in a controlled market. When you're selling outside of a cabotage market, a small vessel, this can be looked at as ordered liquidation because you're stepping down from its highest and best use and fair market value. Okay. Marine asset appraisal follows the basic standards of tangible asset appraisal. We do the same things. First watercraft is believed to have been used around 40,000 years ago. So the industry developed differently in 100 different countries. Therefore, it has historically based idiosyncrasies that sometimes don't follow normal law and commerce. Data can be difficult to find, and the appraiser must fall back on the basic tenets of appraisal and their experience and proper scope of work to obtain credible results. Again, proper scope of work. This is what all this is about. Difficult to do, but if you do your work, you can get credible answers. And all appraisers of marine assets who perform appraisals that are IVS acceptable labor under these same restraints. Okay, some sources of information, Clarkson's. This right here, the World Fleet Register, has so much information, including sales, peer vessels, sales, new construction, not all the time, because again, a lot of sales are kept secret. But when they can find sales, they are included. Very highly respected. A subscription only, and your subscription will range by what different areas of data you want. But if you do, I would say even if you do one ship a month, the subscription is worth it. Classification societies, I mentioned about them. They were once built, that ships have to be built with material approved by and assembled by classification societies. They have to go through all these inspections. I told you about every 5 years by a classification society. There are several dozens of these, and what I list are just some of the bigger ones. Some websites are open to all information, some are not, but the ones that are open have free access. So if the vessels you are looking at are classed by certain people, which you can see and get that information readily, you can often find a lot of information. Here are 3: American Bureau of Shipping, Bureau Veritas, Detnorsky Veritas. 3 big ones. And you'll notice that also at these sites, research and white papers, you can find a lot of information in their white papers about studies besides the vessel register information and record search for specific ship data. You can also find some research and white paper at Admiralty law firms to give you more information on some of the regulations. Hellenic Shipping News, twice daily, it's free. At the bottom of the page, there are numerous links to get you to sales and also graphs of markets. What's going on monthly and over long-term and graph fashion. Danish ship financing comes out several types a year. Again, you have to register to get on, but it's free. And you have to build your own list of brokerage sites. And that can be done by various searches, and you will find that certain brokers give good information, certain brokers give less, certain brokers don't specialize in fishing vessels or offshore oil field or different vessels within their area. And at our website at DLS Marine, you can find under DLS Insights my blogs, which will help fill in some of the blanks that I had to cover quickly on some of the stuff that's coming up in the future that you would need to know about in the valuation of some vessels. Okay, you can get me directly through the website. There is a link to me, but I'm also, and I have no problem giving this at nlaskay@dlsmarine.com. And I will answer any questions that I possibly can, and I will follow up on anything that comes to me to try to improve your knowledge and what you know in this field. And I think, well, we are out of time, but I don't know anything else that we're going to do, David or Alexander, you think we can do?
Norm, this is John. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and information. That was another excellent presentation and very detailed and very easy to read. I do have a couple of questions from some of the participants, if I could quickly ask you. One of the questions one of the participants has asked is, what is the best appraisal method for luxury yachts? Do you have a preference in dealing with luxury yachts?
Yachts is luxury yachts, mega yachts is a gray area, and I didn't even touch, yachts we can take another hour and a half to cover yachts because they are not income producing. Even mega yachts, even though they can be used for rental, and they do charter them out, that just offsets some of the costs, but a mega yacht will never make any money. They are, again, they are more like art. And some of the, I don't deal with them myself, but I understand that there are some places, there are some brokers, there's certainly brokers that handle nothing but mega yachts.
Okay.
But they are very much something that someone buys and then at a certain price and then puts a lot of money into to make them customized to their own. So the purchase price is whatever the brokers think you can get.
And Norm, a follow-up question. In your experience, are there many databases for luxury yachts and those types of vessels similar to the databases for bulk carriers and the like, or is that a very specialized?
No, that's extremely specialized. That is like some high-end art dealers, and sure. They keep that information pretty close.
Okay. Look, we have run over time, only just barely, but before we cut out, we'd just like to, well, we have a number of requests to, and I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but to get a copy of your presentation or perhaps a condensed version if you had something available that we could possibly put on our website, our conference website, if you'd be agreeable to that. Just we have so many people asking for some information regarding to your presentation. If that's possible, perhaps we could discuss that over the next week. And if you have something that we can put on our website for some people that perhaps want some more information.
Yes, I fully understand that. I went through a lot of stuff very quickly. It was very dense presentation. Yes, we will talk about that. I will talk with you and Alexander and Ruka and everyone else involved, and we'll see what sort of product we can put out that will be helpful.
Wonderful, that would be great. Well, once again, Norm, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise and knowledge. It was a very enlightening, especially for someone who has, like myself, has touched certain segments of the marine asset class. There are other participants who deal with it every day, but it was very informative. And thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you, and cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, Norman. Thank you to everyone who participated on this webinar, and keep abreast of our website, ivc-forum.org. We'll be having other webinars throughout the year before our conference in October the 3rd in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Norm.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a great day.
And you do too. Have a great sleep.
Thank you.
Okay.